What if I said there's a fundamental mechanism behind why we may not reach our goals? And for this very reason, perhaps, is why many of the population do not even attempt to set goals in the first place. But with our finite time on this mortal coil, wouldn't it be a given that we spend as much time as we can in trying to end in a high scoring record, as opposed to the fear and regret of our record of misses and losses? There are some mental associations, like there is with everything, with the term goal. And sometimes that scares people alone.
That's the problem with goals. They become the thing you talk about instead of the thing you do.
The associations could be happening individually or simultaneously. Take, for example, the idea of scoring a goal in football or soccer, the idea of a penalty kick, implying there's a goalkeeper to the success of that goal. When we make that type of association, we've implied that it's a game and there's an element of pressure that's involved. The second school of thought, when they hear the term goal, maybe only focus on their failed attempts at goals in the past.
You tried that once before, remember?
The brain almost recalls experiences prior where they've tried to beat the goalkeeper and they wasn't successful.
Just talk us through
Yeah,
it.
come on, look, tonight I was unlucky out there. I took a few shots, tried to score on both the first and second half, but I couldn't seem to score. So, going forward, I probably won't take any more shots, leave it up to the other boys, just unlucky tonight, but I won't be shooting again for sure.
It's interesting in business settings that the word target and goal become interchangeable. I would argue, though, that target has a slightly different neuroassociation than the word goal does. However, a target still comes with an element of burden, of pressure, although I feel it unlocks the competitive mechanism inside of human beings, which makes us automatically want to at least give it a go or attempt it. You can see the word target may be neuroassociating to sports again, however, more solo sports, individual sports, archery, golf, darts. The pressure of performance is very much based upon eye versus eye and an ability to show up on the day of competition. Most people in a work setting have put on targets and pressure of targets. However, they attempt to achieve them purely because of the fear of loss if they don't.
Yeah! Fire! We gotta get those targets in.
Very, very different association to goals that we may set on a personal life. Not often you'll hear people say that I've got personal targets. They will oftentimes refer to them as goals. But regardless of what way you look at it, both of them involve pressure. Goals are, in a way, are a form of mental exercise for our health, for leisure, for fun, for joy and esteem. And as for the competition, well, that just turns the exercise into a sport. However, the competition isn't with others, like modernity focuses on, but on our own internal goalkeeper. You can see how large groups of the populations fail to meet the activity requirements needed for optimum living. So it'll be no wonder why the mental exercise part for an optimized living and meaningful life is also lackluster and missing.
Nobody wants to play.
We must make the problem practical, but the struggle poetic. It's only common when we're looking at a goal to look at it in its most linear sense, as if almost it was just a straight line from one destination to another. And it's only human nature to look from this starting position with these binoculars and think, holy fuck, this is going to take a long time. We want to shorten the distance between that line in the quickest way possible. That's the fuckery of modern living. We want it quick and we want it fast. Lo and behold, there's always these little opportunities, little mini lines in between this problem in practical sense where we can measure some form of growth, some kind of movement, so that we're bouncing between these small problems in a practical way. And slowly by slowly, a long line, linear line, when it's chunked down into small doses, seems a lot more manageable. It's practical, right? This is where all this bullshit of SMART goals and the GROW model, we know this, we inherently know this. These models have been around for a long time. And if you ask someone about setting goals, they'll go, yeah, the SMART goals, yeah, the GROW model, I learned that. But it still doesn't mean that we take action. And why is that? Why, if we have these practical means in order to be able to attain our goals and have the models and these tools to be able to use it, it's just not sexy enough, and it doesn't always ensure that we're going to keep on track or at least have a way of reaching the goal or slotting the goal past the goalkeeper. Because in reality, when we're talking about goals, we both must make them poetic as well as practical. And if we're being poetic about the idea of goal setting, then realistically, it looks like this. Lots of peaks and troughs, lots of up and down, lots of movement between an ebb and flow. In these states that you see here are the states of kind of desperation, of delays, of excuses, of barriers, of setbacks, and there's this constant moving in between. So the poetic form of that goal setting or any form of achievement ends up becoming more like mountain peaks, like climbing a mountain. But we must first chunk the mountain down practically into steps, but acknowledge ultimately that it is a mountain climb. And you don't climb mountains in 5 minutes. You don't do hiking for it to be over quickly. You do it to take it all in. Once we have these two in symbiotic relationship, we can understand then the two things that are going on inside of our mind when we come to setting goals. There's almost a creative element, there's almost a poetic element to our struggle. And if we can find that poeticness to the struggle, it gives it more meaning and more impetus for us to be able to solidify and amalgamate that with the practical. Now, obviously, everyone with variation focus on different things. There's some people that look at the poetic side a lot more than they look at the practical side, right? This is kind of like your motivational videos and geeing yourself up and inspiring content that makes you feel good about yourself. It's very poetic, it's very narrative driven. However, they may suffer then by not having a practical means in which to chunk the problem down. When we have a healthy dose of both a practical problem and a poetic struggle, it emboldens us more to be able to take action and gives us that encouragement when we're feeling quite low. And don't get me wrong, there is a healthy amount of delusion that you do need in order to achieve your goals. But I wouldn't openly share that with other people because they might try and incarcerate you.
Fix me a coffee with no milk and no sugar that's as dark as the autumn evenings drawing in, as I prepare for the winter's eternal death and my re-emergence in my winter arc.
It's only human nature that once we start to goal set like this, that we're going to want, our appetite increases and we're going to want more. If we take the example of someone that does, never done any exercise before, we've probably met these people in our life. They start off, for example, wanting to learn to run. They're out of shape. They start here and boy, oh boy, what a fucking distance in between to reach that goal. However, they chunk it down, 1K, 2K, 3K, 4K, 5, whatever the situation is. And then before you know it, like about this point, there I have, about this point here, the goals change because now they're running 5Ks all the time and they've joined a half marathon. So this whole line needs to be disappeared because no longer that starting point, the line's then extended, which means that ultimately we're always looking into the future to try and develop and evolve once we commit to this kind of practical mindset. So here was sedentary, lazy bastard, didn't run, couldn't think they could run. Well, by the time they've chunked this problem down, they're them annoying type of people that want you to go on park runs on the weekend. Like, oh man, I'm doing this 5K and I'm doing this half marathon. You're thinking, fuck, 2 years ago, you was sedentary. That linear line that starts with, it's easy to look at it from this kind of distance and think, holy fuck, I'm demotivated before I even start. What's the point of even fucking starting? The poetic part will see that life comes with struggle and we have to find maybe a mythos, logos, meaning in our life that gives a little bit of kind of color to the canvas of otherwise a very black and white life. If you can assume that there's always going to be some form of traversing and difficulty in life, and you somewhat to some regard welcome it, or you can give meaning to it, then ultimately these mountain troughs become something to marvel at. Just like the buzz that someone will feel when they finally get to this peak and realize there's actually another peak that I've got to climb. I'm not done yet, right? This is what hikers and mountain climbers are looking to do. The whole fun of that is traversing it. And inside of here is that poetic element. And it's very hard to find people that have both of these. I think if we do have both of them inside of our mind in a way, one you could argue in that kind of layman's terms is left and right brain thinking, one is logical, one is fairly creative. So we have to look at these and realize that this is going on, and to bring these and unify these two polarities will give us a lot more emboldening strength when it comes to our own personal goal setting. And again, where they meet in the middle is that they both are repetitious, because repetition is the mother of skill, and the repetition over and over again is obviously what ends up under programming the sequence, programming our mind in a way. When you talk about the subconscious mind and talking about us running on automation, running that same script, because guaranteed when we sabotage or we feel demoralized when it comes to goal setting or achieving the goals, is falling off that bandwagon, is losing that ability to then be repetitious with it. Say that over here is where your law of attraction, your visualization stuff kind of lives. Here you kind of see where kind of the grassroots, earthy kind of base stuff. So when we don't feel like the practical stuff is working, we must then lean on the poetic side of thing, on the narrative that can then embolden us to carry on with that practice again.
Mrs. D, Mrs. I, you're supposed to be teaching spelling, not poetry.
You can kind of say that over here is where will is and where action is, ultimately is will. And over here is where feeling and kind of feeling meets the spirit. And obviously when I'm saying language and narrative, we're able to suspend our disbelief and watch a movie for 90 minutes where there's a theme of a struggle or an archetypal idea, and we suspend our disbelief and watch that bullshit over and over again. The difficulty is that those stories and those myths, they either finish in a book and a chapter, or they finish in 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, and there's closure. Unfortunately, there's not closure in our life until they close the casket.
Oh man, that is depressing.
So unfortunately, there isn't that element of closure that we see and experience in music, television, stories that have this really definitive start, middle, and end, because our life is always in movement until the day that we're no longer here, without being too morbid. You could probably also say, in a way, that this is the what and the how, and over here is the why. Why the fuck are you doing it in the first place, right? Someone's goal is going to be completely emboldened if they're able to marry the what and the how with the why. Whereas most people, if you think about it, we kind of then focus on the what and the how. How do I get bigger biceps? How do I start a business? How do I do this? And it becomes very practical, but not enough really that poetic element of the why, because it's hard for someone else to give you your why in a situation or a goal. You can lend upon other people and mirror other people's goals and aspirations. However, they are uniquely yours. You've got to beat the goalkeeper and they can't help it. So we need to get the what, how, why. The sequencing of that is up to you. You could ask why, what, and how, or you could do this a million different times in different sequences, almost like an algorithm. You can go what, how, why, how, what, how, why, what. I don't know what I'm fucking saying now, but you get the point.
What did he say?
Rate in which this polarity swings, almost like a Newton's cradle. I was going to buy one of these for the video, but I thought I better not waste my money on that just for the point of a video. But that pendulum swinging side to side will depend on that person's wavelength and that individual. However, they always moves regardless. There's going to be times when what you need is to focus on the poetic element of the struggle or the poetic element of the goal to really foster that environment and that will to supplement it and nourish it. And there's other times where you need to get your head out the fucking clouds and get practical, right? What's all the good with all the poetry that you can have if you haven't been able to translate it into something practical, into something that is a what?
No poetry, just a straight answer. Which is it?
Think of Carl Jung and his contribution to psychiatry and the human condition, a really, really popular psychotherapist, because his interest in weaving in these complex ideas of personal narrative and storytelling into his practice and acknowledging there's a collective as well as a personal experience when it comes to storytelling. Feel free to watch the video up here on my first video on YouTube, which you need some fucking willpower to sit through that. Maybe it's a good training exercise. You think about the classic Jordan Peterson, again, a clinical psychologist who was very much into the ideas of Carl Jung. He had a great way of using that poetic element.
Tidy your room and be a monster. Go and be a monster and tidy your room. Don't let your wife just shout at you. You've got to be capable.
Fusing very practical information, practical knowledge, practical wisdom with some form of poetic licensing. So rather than causing dissonance, it's causing resonance in terms of vibration. All that being said, I do believe we intrinsically know this interplay between the practical and poetic to be true, even if we aren't consciously aware of it. Social media is awry with many beautifully poetic quotes to inspire and embolden its users. Pages dedicated to the temporary feeling of life-affirming poetry in an otherwise mundanely practical day. We call it a hit of dopamine, feel-good juice. I suppose it's different to experience this poetry purely through access to it, instead of through the total understanding with praxis. We can easily use that shot of feel-good juice while being chronically undernourished in the department of the practical application. In simpler terms, we can intellectually or emotionally masturbate over this kind of poetry without doing fuck all in the practical sense, because the poetic narrative is just too hollow and vapid. In modernity, it's evident we have a comparative complex. We contrast our achievements, merits, and dreams to the other, under the cosh of pacing, significance, and societal pressure. We give up on the mental sport of goals because we aren't professionals, so it's best leave it to them. The practical elements always seem common sense using models like grow and smart. However, most fail to do so because the poetic part is lackluster. It's hard to maintain the practical part in the face of trials, tribulations, external circumstance, and the ebb and flow of emotional and cognitive impulses. We get distracted or demoralized. As much as religious doctrine and religion as a whole gets its fair share of ridicule in modernity, followers are afforded a baseline when it comes to standards of living, striving, meaning and expectation, whether it's God's plan, fate, destiny, purpose, or just a notion that when man plans, God laughs. Regardless whether it's goals and targets or our standards of living, when we are at our worst, we feel aimless, without direction and without meaning. If we can give meaning to the struggle and logic to the problem, then we increase our sporting aptitude to our own evolution and development. But just like sports, there are on and off seasons. There are times we must do some sport rehabilitation to continue playing at a high level, but we play with passion because it's who we are. When we can identify the movement between the practical and the poetic elements of our striving, it gives us a better position not only to fulfill our personal goals, but to experience the glory without actually achieving it. The perpetual state of the journey and being en route is sufficient.